So I'm going to be talking about stop and frisk. So the first article, sorry, my computer's a little bit laggy. Come on. So the first article is Stop, Question, and Frisk in New York City, the study of public opinions. So the procedure in this article was a survey was conducted using street intercepts where they would just intercept people on the street and ask about random people about their experiences with police officers with regard to the stop and frisk techniques. Data was collected from pedestrians in 5 boroughs in the New York City. It didn't say exactly where they were in New York City or what they were called. Um, the survey was conducted on 3 different days of the week at different times and in different neighborhoods within the borough. So, sorry. Surveyors were asked to indicate sex, age, race, ethnicity, neighborhood, um, education, employment status, income, marital status, and whether or not they had children, whether they personally knew an officer, whether they'd been previously stopped and questioned by the police or previously frisked, whether they know a friend or family member that's been stopped, and knowledge of stop and frisk techniques. So, the dependent variables, surveyors were also asked to indicate citizens' opinions on the following: whether they believe that stop and frisk protects them, makes the neighborhood feel safer, reduces drug dealing, reduces gun violence in the streets, gets guns off the streets, uh, whether they support the practice of stop and frisk, and whether they believe that video cameras / body cams on police would improve the practice. So the results of this study, the study shows that certain characteristics are correlated with attitudes towards stop and frisk, and some support the practice because of the perception that it reduces crime and protects law-abiding citizens, whereas others believe it's motivated by racial or age-based bias and limits the rights of citizens in public spaces. So in the second article, it talks about, well, first of all, the topic or the title of the article is Stop and Frisk in New York City, estimating racial disparities in post-stop outcomes. And this study examined the risk of being frisked and the use of force and found that the risk was dependent upon the stopped individual's race. Um, so race and ethnicity and the type of force used against a suspect can affect how frisked an individual is and whether force is used against a stopped suspect. And in this study, they used the UF 250 questionnaire that contains 7 categories for race and ethnicity. In this analysis, white Latino, and black Latino individuals were retained for the analysis. And age, gender, and ratio of weight to height were also included in the questionnaire. So this model accounts for a variety of characteristics of the stop, including whether the officer was in uniform, whether the stop occurred outside or whether the officer was alone, and whether the officer was in an area with a high crime rate. Race and ethnicity is estimated by using 2 models, the IPWRA and the CEM, which create equivalent groups of blacks and whites and Latinos and whites. An observational study was also done with 2 treatment groups, this being the likelihood that an individual is black, or Latino. And as compared to white pedestrians, Latino pedestrians are more likely to be frisked and to experience any force or non weapon force than white pedestrians. However, being Latino is not associated with the use of weapon force. The observed disparities are likely due to an implicit biases. The study shows that stop and frisk should be reduced in order to meet the goals of Black Lives Matter and defund the police movements. So comparing the two articles, Article 1 had a time frame of 3 days to survey. They also used street intercept to conduct the survey, and the data was conducted 3 different days, times, and different neighborhoods. And the question primarily asked was how likely the citizens were likely to support Stop and Frisk uh, and their opinions on Stop and Frisk. And in Article 2, the study was conducted by analyzing and evaluating the UF 250 forms that the officer was asked to fill out whenever they made a stop. And the time frame for Article 2 was about 5 years. They collected all the UF 250 forms and uploaded them to a database, and the database sorted through them, and then that's when they collected their research and analyzed all of it. It particularly focused on minorities rather than Caucasians. And then the question asked for this article was, are blacks and Latinos more likely to be stopped and frisked compared to white people? And then the similarities, both of the articles focused on the results of stop and frisk practices. Both included race and ethnicity and age as part of their independent variables, and they also included whether the individual had been stopped and frisked before in their dependent variables.